All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us at Indiana Disability Justice Task Force for our stakeholder panel discussion on sexual health for people with cognitive and developmental disabilities as sexual violence primary prevention. We're really excited to have this conversation with you all, and we are so excited for you to hear from our guests. Sierra, can you advance to the next slide? Just a couple of notes about housekeeping and technology today. We are recording this session, and you will have access to that recording shortly after the webinar. I believe we'll also be making available the slides in a PDF form for you to use as well. You will see that your mic was automatically muted when you entered today's webinar. If you could please, if you already have your camera on, go ahead and turn that off. For right now, we just want to make sure that we have our panelists kind of at the top of the screen so that everyone can see them. If you're having any issues with audio, we do recommend calling in with a phone for the best audio experience. We highly encourage you all to ask questions, introduce yourself in the chat, and we ask that in order to do so, if you're in the chat, please go ahead and also let us know who your question is addressed to. We'll do a Q&A with our panelists at the end of the session today. At certain points during the presentation, I will read questions out loud for the whole audience to hear. So if you want to remain anonymous, please let us know in the chat as well, if you'd like that to be read anonymously. Lastly, we want to thank our live CART provider, Deb. You all can look at the bottom and find closed captioning available. We do have communication access, real-time translation. So thank you, Deb, for being here today. All right, next slide, please. Thank you. So we are your Indiana Disability Justice Task Force hosts. My name is Haley Rigger. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm with the Indiana Coalition on Sexual Assault and Human Trafficking, and I serve on the IDJ, Indiana Disability Justice Leadership. I will be your host and discussion mover today. I'm joined by some of my partners on the task force here. We have Jody Powers, she, her pronouns, ICADV consultant, and member of our IDJ leadership team. Jody will be a member of our panel. Jennifer Mill-Harsick, also she, her pronouns, also an ICADV consultant and member of our IDJ leadership team. Jen will be helping manage our chat and moderating our chat today. And last but not least, we have Sierra Olivia Thomas-Williams, she, her pronouns. She is the co-founder, co-leader, and co-facilitator of IDJ. Sierra will be our tech manager and making sure things run smoothly behind the scenes. So typically we like to do a little intro to primary prevention and talk about risk factors and protective factors. Today, we don't have time to do that because we really want to focus on ensuring our panelists have plenty of time. That being said, we still wanted to give a little note about the work that we're doing. The intersection of disability justice and primary prevention is really important to talk about here. So we want to overcome societal and community level risk factors by educating ourselves about sexual wellness, protective factors against violence, and educating ourselves and our communities about accessibility needs and sexual wellness. We know that social isolation and social exclusion are a risk factor for violence. So we can prevent violence by creating spaces in which safe and stable relationships thrive, individuals' needs are met, and in which violence is simply not an option someone would want to choose in order to assert power.
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Yeah.
Is my feed showing up under Nicole's name, or is my name present?
Is this Luna?
Yes.
It looks like Nicole's name, but we can just rename you.
Okay, I don't know how to do that. Okay, there you go.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we want to make sure that we're making social inclusion and connection easier than isolation and violence. When we center historically marginalized groups in violence prevention work, we make our community safer for everyone. Next slide. All right, so I'm just going to briefly go over our objectives and give a little quick intro to our panelists, and then we'll pass it over to our presenters for today. Our objectives today are to identify current sexual health research that is inclusive of people with cognitive and developmental disabilities. We're going to locate sexual violence prevention resources for people with cognitive and developmental disabilities. And then lastly, we will listen and learn from the wisdom of lived experience experts. Really excited for that as well. So I'm going to call out the names of our panelists. Today, we will be joined by Don DeMaias, Lydia Hamilton, and Melissa Dubey of the Center for Health Equity at the Indiana Institute on Disability and Community. For our panel discussion, we are joined by Sister Jackie McCracken, Will Worley, and Liz Erb from the Village of Marici. We're joined by Jody Powers, Sarah Boyd, and Luna Eversong Class, who will be our lived experience experts. And then lastly, we'll hear from Nicole Cass-Colvin, a sexual assault advocate and prevention specialist at Safe Place in Southeastern Indiana. All right, all that being said, I will pass it over to our researchers at CHE.
Cool. All right, thank you, Haley. Hi, everyone. My name is Don DeMaias. I am, if you're looking for me, I'm an Asian person with Black hair. And today we are going to talk about sexual health education for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities in Indiana. Presenting with me today are Lydia Hamilton and Melissa Dubey. We are from the Center for Health Equity and the Indiana Resource Center for Autism at the Indiana Institute on Disability and Community. Next slide, please. All right, so our agenda for today. So what I'm gonna present will be from a recent survey project that we did on sexual health education for students with disabilities in Indiana public schools. Afterwards, I'll turn it over to Lydia, who will discuss an ongoing project that we're doing on improving the sexual health literacy and advocacy skills for women with IDD in Indiana. Afterwards, Melissa will discuss an online pilot program that is based on the project that Lydia will discuss. Next slide. So I will discuss a recent project that was completed last year about the sexual health education for students with disabilities in Indiana public schools, professional school personnel's perception and current practices. Next slide. So what we noticed in our literature review was that many students with disabilities had lower levels of sexual health literacy. Many of them did not receive adequate sexual health education in comparison to students without disabilities. We've also noticed that a lot of the educational materials on sexual health topics were not up to date and comprehensive in the information that was provided. Many parents and guardians were not prepared to teach their children with disabilities about sexual health and meeting their sexual health needs and education. We also noticed that a lot of information were not equitable for students with cognitive limitations. This is in spite of the fact that what research says is that many individuals with disabilities are sexually active, but also more importantly, individuals with disabilities are at higher risk for things like sexually transmitted infections, and also of higher risk for things like sexual assault. So because of those things, the purpose of this project was to examine the beliefs, comfort, preparation, needs, barriers, and practices in delivering sexual health education for students with disabilities among professional school personnel in Indiana public schools. Next slide, please. So the survey process. So what we did was we conducted an online survey of professional school personnel in Indiana. We conducted that survey between November 2020 and April 2021. We recruited school personnel who met multiple criteria that included them teaching sexual health education between the semesters of fall 2018 and spring 2020. These personnel needed to have taught at least one student with a disability in a classroom setting. They also have had to have had an active teaching license during those periods when they taught the student with disabilities. So in our online survey responses, we had 105 people respond, but only 80 of those people met the eligibility criteria to do the survey. And in the survey, there were 48 questions that included multiple choice and open-ended responses. Next slide, please. So what we found in our survey was that the majority of respondents were female, white, and over the age of 40. Most of them taught students with disabilities and an inclusion classroom setting with students without disabilities. A lot of them taught sexual health education in family and consumer sciences courses. A lot of these courses included topics on HIV, puberty, pregnancy, and reproduction, and healthy relationships. According to the respondents, many of them were comfortable teaching sexual health education topics to students with disabilities. However, what we also found out was the topic that most of them were least prepared to teach were topics that revolved around gender and sexual orientation topics. Next slide, please. Additionally, we found that majority of the participants did not have an official curriculum to teach students with disabilities on topics of sexual health. A lot of them adapted their curriculum to meet the students' needs. A lot of their materials came from online sources, commercial materials, materials that were provided by the school, but also library materials. Most of them did not receive any academic training on how to teach students with disabilities on topics of sexual health, but we also found that the majority of these participants were interested in receiving more training on how to teach sexual health to students with disabilities. Next slide, please. So with all that being said, what do we recommend? We should also, before I move forward, I should also note that what we didn't ask in the survey was that we didn't ask, we don't know whether or not the students with disabilities comprehended or understood the materials that were being taught to them. So that's an important note to make. But regardless, we do recommend that there should be more education and training for school personnel in order to meet the needs of students with disabilities and prepare them to teach different topics in sexual health. We also recommend curriculum and education materials that meet different learning needs and styles of students with disabilities, but also have materials that are adaptable to meet the needs of both students with and without disabilities. And now I'm going to turn it over to Lydia.
Thanks, Don. My name is Lydia Hamilton, pronoun she, her, hers. I am a white woman. I have short blonde chin length hair, and I am wearing a short sleeve black blouse. And today I'll be discussing our improving sexual health literacy and advocacy skills for women with intellectual and developmental disabilities in Indiana project. Next slide. So this project started in 2018, and we are now in the second phase. The first phase was to establish mainly the sexual health needs of women with IDD in Indiana, and then to develop an in-person evidence-based pilot curriculum. And activities for this phase included conducting a literature review, key informant interviews, 3 focus groups. We had 2 with women with IDD and 1 with parents of children with IDD, as well as developing a pilot curriculum that was meant to be done in an in-person setting. And now in the second phase, we are adapting that in-person curriculum for an online format, and we will be delivering and evaluating that pilot curriculum. My colleague Melissa, who will be talking after me, will be discussing that curriculum in a little bit more detail, and I'm going to be sharing some of the findings from the first phase of our project. Next slide. And I just wanted to highlight that funding support for this project has been provided by the Indiana Governor's Council for People with Disabilities. Next slide. So sexual health risk for women with IDD. Dawn briefly mentioned some of these similar risks for the survey of school personnel, but it is estimated that women with developmental disabilities, there's a high percentage of them that are sexually abused in their lifetime, estimated at 68 to 83%. And within those individuals who are abused, less than half of them actually seek services for the abuse. Also from the literature, it is noted that women with mild and moderate intellectual disabilities are more likely to have unsafe sex compared to their counterparts without ID, and they are also more likely then to get pregnant and be a mother. And women with developmental disabilities are also less likely to receive preventive sexual and reproductive health screenings compared to women without disabilities. Next slide. So in terms of need for healthy, intimate relationships and sexual self-advocacy, in general, the public often views and incorrectly views individuals with disabilities as being asexual, that they don't have a need for physical intimacy, or that they're even unable to have sexual experiences or relationships. We have found from the literature and from our key informant interviews and focus groups that women with IDD have diverse viewpoints about their sexuality, and even there's a diverse range of sexual identities. So for example, some individuals may desire to have close, intimate relationships, but not necessarily to be physically intimate with another individual. And as Dawn, related to what Dawn was talking about, individuals with IDD have lower levels of sexual health knowledge. They have fewer opportunities for sexual health education, as well as even fewer opportunities to engage in healthy, intimate relationships. Next slide. So with that in mind, there is an unmet need and many barriers to sexual health education. Students with ID receive both less sexual health education in school settings, as well as less instruction from their parents and caregivers compared to their counterparts without disabilities. In Indiana, sexual health education is not required for all students, and it is not comprehensive in nature. Public schools are only required to teach abstinence, and they are focused on promoting marriage. So in short, there's this unmet need on education about healthy relationships, including topics around self-advocacy, emotions, intimacy, and importantly, consent. And with that in mind, so there's this unmet need for education, but when looking at educational materials, there are very few evidence-based sexual health curricula available for adult women with IDD. And this really puts women with IDD at high risk and creating a lot of barriers for them to develop their sexuality in a healthy way. Next slide. So now I'm going to discuss some of the things we learned primarily from our focus group with women with IDD as well as their parents. And through those conversations, we found that many women have had many adverse and negative experiences, such as abuse, and many of them had really just these negative perceptions of sexuality and intimacy and relationships. Some of them may not have the autonomy that's required to make decisions about their sexual health. As found in the literature, the women that we talked to, most of them received very little, if any, sexual health education in school or from their parents. Many of them also reported challenges in being able to set personal boundaries, knowing how to say no. And then many also reported negative experiences in their encounters with healthcare professionals regarding their sexual and reproductive healthcare needs. Next slide. So now I'm going to share some of the quotes from the focus groups to highlight some of the things we learned. So in terms of sexual health education, one of the women shared that it was the sex video. So like just how to be safe when having it and all of that goody two-shoes, making sure you're on birth control and stuff like that. And another woman shared that I learned it on TV, which is kind of like a bad thing to know now, but my family didn't even talk about it. So growing, we didn't even talk about it. I learned about it on TV shows that I watched. Next slide. And from a parent, she shared like she was wanting to include sexual health education with her daughter, but she shared that she found very little that was suitable for someone like my daughter. And so it was very discouraging. And I talked to teachers and they said, we haven't been able to identify really great materials either. We use these books from the library that are for young girls and during puberty, but those are totally not adapted for special needs people who, like my daughter, who are not able to read and not able to grasp what's being addressed there. Next slide, please. And these two quotes illustrate some of the more negative and abusive relationships. This first participant, she shared that her boyfriend was pretty controlling. So I mean, I told him to stop and he wouldn't listen. And he kept doing it. So mine was kind of hard to do. So I had to get my parents involved and stuff like that. And the second quote is from a parent. And she shared that once her daughter got out of school and just got to working and was out in the workforce then, she always seemed to pick the ones that treated her like dirt. In fact, I know for a fact that she's been raped, she's been abused, she's been hit. You know, we've had a sheriff investigate, but we can't get my daughter to stand up and say this was wrong. She says, but he loves me, Mom. He loves me. That's why he did it. He loves me. Next slide. And in terms of sexual and reproductive health care needs, one of the participants shared that, no, I have not been for a pap smear or anything like that because I have a fear of doctors going in there. And also, you don't have to go unless you're super, super, super sexually active, and I'm not super sexually active. And another shared that when she was like 17 or 18, I had a male doctor, but he kind of just shoved the metal thing up out my thing, and it wasn't very pleasant. And so then I got a female doctor, and ever since I've seen a female instead of a male. Next. And as part of our focus groups, we asked the women with IDD as well as their parents if they had recommendations for sexual health education topics, as well as methods for teaching. And I'm just going to share some of the recommendations for topics. And that included things around assertiveness and saying no, being strong, which is related to consent, as well as hygiene, communication skills, birth control, being safe in relationships, and related to that, just healthy relationships in general, not necessarily intimate relationships. And yeah, next slide. And now Melissa will continue.
My name is Melissa Doobie. I work at Indiana Resource Center for Autism and consult with Center for Health Equity. I go by she, her, and hers. I am a white woman and I'm wearing a dress today. So today I'm going to talk about curriculum and the curriculum that we're developing. And so next slide, please. So the curriculum will be based, as Lydia and Donna both talked about, the literature review, the key informant interviews, the focus groups, and then throughout the time where we've been writing the curriculum, we've been getting feedback from a group of advisory group of adult women with IDD, and they've been giving us ideas about how to make it very concrete and make it applicable for this population. Next slide. So as Lydia said, that the topics that from the focus groups that we wanted to focus on is all related to these 9 topics. And so we have within each of the topics several different option, or not options, just so it'll be specifically defined. So as you heard from some of the women, they said down there, or they weren't using body parts when they were talking about going to see the physician. And so part of our bodies and sexual anatomy is actually identifying the medical terms of our bodies so that they'll be able to go to the doctor and say what is exactly hurting. Reproduction and birth control is a comprehensive program, so we wanted to make sure that they know all of their options. But also taking care of their pelvic area, so they'll understand what a yeast infection is, what is an STI and and a UTI. So then they'll know the signs of it. They'll know what to do. For preventative health care, we're going to talk about women's exams, and these are mammograms and all of the other exams that we know, pap smears, just all of the exams. And so in addition to that, it's going to be relationships, gender identity, sexual orientations, consent, how to build trust, who is your trusted people, and being able to know what to share with different types of people. So so that our folks will understand, what is a stranger and what do I share with a stranger, or if they're a person that has, that's somebody that is an acquaintance, or is it a friend? And so that they understand what kind of information they would share at each of the relationship stages. In addition, what is a dating safety? We're going to talk about internet safety and how do you meet people? What do you do to be safe yourself? And then also how, what is private and public, and how that all fits into everything. So also about communication and setting boundaries, and so that they understand that they're valid, their opinions are valid, their ideas are valid, and so that they know that they can say, I like that, or I don't like that. So they'll be able to communicate. And also a little bit on abuse. Oops. And so and then a little bit on intimate relationships. Next slide. So the training will be a virtual workbook. It will all be done virtually, and then individuals will have a workbook in front of them. The workbook will be very concrete, simple language information. And then they'll have like these little signs that will relate the PowerPoint and the workbook together. We'll also, during our Zoom meetings, we'll have live transcripts. So that will be in case folks need that. My area of working in schools is all about evidence-based practices. So we're implementing those evidence-based practices around the strategies that we'll be teaching on sexual health. And so we'll have lots of schedules for each lesson. We'll have a PowerPoint for each lesson, and then we're going to have some videos, which I'll show you in a few minutes. We also will give the participants immediate feedback so that they know what they're doing well, and also give them tips on what they could say differently. And so with that will be some role play such scenarios. And so we want them to be able to, if when they go to the doctor, that they know exactly what to say, or they're with their partner, that they know exactly what to say. Not exactly, but at least they have an idea of a script which will help them know what to say. Next slide. So the setup would be, we're going to have 2 6-week trainings. Like I said, it's all going to be via Zoom. We're going to have 10 participants in each of the training. The training will be 12 sessions, 2 sessions for 1 day per week for 6 weeks. So we'll have a 45-minute session. They'll take a 15-minute break, and then we'll have another 45-minute session. There will be a pre and a post training survey, and that's so that we understand what they have learned, what they started out with knowing, and then what they have learned from the training. We're also going to utilize international interactive activities. And so what we mean by that is we're going to break them out in breakout rooms so that we can meet in smaller rooms. Also be able to have more, like I said, the role play. And so the more interactive we can make it. We have activities throughout the training for the whole time as well. So then I wanted to show you one of the videos one of my colleagues, Peggy Holtz, has created. She's interviewed several women with developmental disabilities and to get their perspective. So the next slide. And so it's called Improving Sexual Health and Self-Advocacy Skills. Go ahead and start it.
improving sexual health and self-advocacy skills. An overview.
Why is it important to advocate for sexual health? It's important because a lot of people with disabilities tend to get overlooked as not non-sexual human beings. Some people don't have the desire to, that's fine. But some people do. And it's their parents that control them, that tells them, oh, you can't have sex. It's our right to have sex if we want to. We're sexual human beings. It's the natural urge of our hormones to want to have sex. Just speaking your mind is what advocacy is just about. Speaking your mind, speaking what you want in any subject. Any subject. No matter if it's sexual health, living situation, no matter what the subject is.
It's important to know your body.
A lot of people with disabilities don't know your parts and what they're actually for and how to use them. And if you're going to be sexually active, then you need to know how to use them, what to do, and what they're for. It's sad because not a lot of parents want to teach their kids, especially people or children with disabilities, what their body parts are about.
You have to think about the consequences. There's pregnancy out there. There's there's unwanted pregnancy. There's all these diseases that women can get. There's rape out. There's also rape out there too.
Be safe during sex. You got to use protection. Got to be aware of what kind of diseases that you can get. Got to know those kind of types. So you just got to be aware of everything.
Just going to the doctor and getting the physical done, getting a pap smear done, mammograms and breast exams, and it's your choice who's the doctor you want to see.
It's kind of important so you're not getting any kind of diseases like breast cancer, ovarian cancer, STDs, those kind of things you just got to be aware of. Gonna get like a routine test or schedule a test to get those done.
Looking for a relationship.
I think being a good self-advocate for your health, so you know what you want and don't want in a relationship. Because many people that are in a relationship, they don't know what they want and don't want.
Understand what you're getting yourself into when it comes to marriage, when it comes to relationships, when it comes to sex, when it comes to just overall being healthy, having a healthy relationship, no abuse.
Good relationship is where the guys kind of treat you like a princess. That's what I'm always kind of thinking. Sometimes their relationship goes that way.
So we're going to go ahead and stop the video due to time, but I think that this gave you a really good insight to some of the videos that we have created for the project. We've been able to interview the folks and get their insight, and we're really looking forward to that being the center of part of the training, because I think it's great that I don't know about other people, but I can learn better by people of that are like me. And so we're hoping that that will be very helpful to get insights from other people that have developmental disabilities. So for the project, the people that will be able to participate will need to be women that are aged between the ages of 18 and 49, live in Indiana, have an intellectual disability or developmental disability. They'll have to have internet access because it's all done via Zoom. So we're suggesting it be on a computer or a laptop or a tablet. They'll need to have speakers and a camera. Like I said, it would be, I already told you the amount of time that it would be. We're going to make it so that it's at a reading level, at a 1.4 grade reading level, because we want to make sure that we can reach as many folks as possible. And they'll have to be able to participate and be able to have some kind of reciprocal conversation. And the importance of that is because we want them to be able to have a back and forth conversation with us. We want them to be able to ask us questions, and then us to be able to ask them questions to see if their understanding, what their comprehension of the material is. Next slide. So here is all of the whole team's emails. We'll hope to be recruiting this summer, and we're waiting for IRB approval, Indiana Research Board approval, but we'll be in touch. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you guys so much. That was really helpful information. I'm really looking forward to this curriculum being available. So we are going to move into our stakeholder panel. So I'm going to invite our participants from the Village of Marici to unmute themselves and turn their cameras back on. Again, we are joined by Sister Jackie McCracken, Will Worley, and Liz Erb from the Village of Marici. All right, so Village of Marici folks, what education or support is provided for the persons you support with developmental disabilities?
First of all, I just want to say that we have been trying to provide education around sexuality and relationships for about 5 years now. We have involved Dr. Mary Ciccarelli, who's very interested in this topic, and I know some of you know her. We have been using a diverse curriculum, and just recently we have decided to use a curriculum from an outfit called Elevatus, which Liz will talk about a little bit more. We also want to say we are not experts in this. I don't want to use the word dabbling because that sounds like we're just not very professional at it, but we have used various resources in the past 5 years. Also, I just want to mention that our coaches, life skills coaches, spend a lot of time with the people that we support, and they deal with some of these issues. And we have just recently provided training for our coaches in this area, which I think was very helpful to them. So again, we're not experts. We can offer you our we can offer you our suggestions.
Thank you. What precipitated the need for this education about healthy relationships and sexual self-advocacy? And what are the ongoing needs of the persons you support?
I think, so I started with Village of Marici in 2016, I think it was. They were still a pretty young organization. And when I joined with them, we really kind of wanted to create a curriculum kind of based around just general healthcare and making sure everybody was doing their best to live healthy lives. And I think it became pretty clear pretty quickly through a few acute instances and then through some requests from residents in the building that we needed to kind of focus a little bit more on sexual health and sexual self-advocacy. So one of the major goals that we always try to focus on is fostering independence. So kind of staying in line with that and trying to talk about sexual self-advocacy, we've really kind of tried to create a set of sessions or education sessions held once a week that will kind of try to foster that a little bit. So I mean, I think one of the big things that we kind of talk about from time to time is the fact that it's kind of a unique situation in the village of Marici. A lot of people are experiencing independence for their first time. They're spending a lot of time away from their parents. Some really significant sources of pressure and information, and they're getting to make choices for themselves for the first time. So I think we kind of just saw a role for us in that, in helping them make the most informed and positive and self-advocate decision possible with the sexual health education.
Great. Thank you, Will. What teaching methods have you found to be effective to accommodate diverse learning styles?
Yeah, so Jackie mentioned this, but we have, I've been with Village of Marici since January 2019 and have kind of come on the team of creating and implementing different resources that Jackie and Will have come across or that I've come across. But as of recently, within the past year and a half, all three of us became participated in a training called Elevatus, where they helped us equip ourselves to become sexuality facilitators, educators for those with intellectual disabilities. And it was a 3-day course. By no means are pros at it or experts, but it provided us different resources and a unified curriculum to implement not only with those that Village of Marici support, individuals with disabilities, but also a curriculum to talk about the topic with parents or key stakeholders there, and also staff. And so we have been using that as a resource that includes both visuals and role plays and videos to really kind of meet all different kind of learning styles and to complement one another to create a full picture of all these, very complex topics and things that to help all different functioning levels to understand and comprehend through videos, visuals, discussions as well. We've incorporated kind of review games that hone in on repetition. We have found that to be very, very helpful to review topics over and over again in order to really create those concepts concrete and easy to relate back to for our individuals, and to make all the topics approachable, something that they feel comfortable and confident bringing up and discussing with not only us, but their peers in the group.
Wonderful, thank you. What are some of the barriers you've encountered as you facilitate these educational sessions with the persons you support?
Well, one of the primary barriers is how we have all been taught as we grew up about sexuality and about our bodies. And so, it's no different for people with disabilities as it is for any of us when we were growing up. The negative messages that, we continue to find in people with disabilities. I think, also it's different. Family members assume that people who do not have disabilities are going to be sexual people in their adult lives, and they find it very different for people with disabilities. They think those individuals, and I think I heard that from the IU people, that people with disabilities aren't interested in having intimate relationships, in having sex. So I think those are the primary barriers. I know that Will and Liz, I think you were going to add those maybe.
I think kind of building off of that, we've received a lot of maybe resistance or pushback from parents. They're still pretty involved in their adult children's lives. So, whenever we have a conversation that about sexual advocacy or anything that we're talking about in the class, we kind of mentally prepare to have that conversation again with parents to sort of explain why we're doing something, why we're talking about something in a way we're talking about it. So getting parent buy-in, I think, has been a barrier a little bit, but also trying to normalize the conversation around sexuality because of a lot of the things that Jackie sort of talked about, all that information that has either not been given or has been maybe given incorrectly or what have you.
Mm-hmm. And I would say one last would be establishing a universal language for individuals to, identify things that might be going wrong or something that's uncomfortable or things like that with sexual health. And IU group mentioned as well to feel confident to identify body parts in order to identify, problems or things going on. So that's been a barrier, but something we really have been trying to address and become more, familiar and with a positive connotation of growing this education as well.
I would say one last thing about a barrier, and that is families, parents' values. Their values may be different from the people that we're supporting. And there can be a lot of tension around that.
Thank you. Well, on the flip side of that, what has been helpful to you all as facilitators in promoting the sexual health of the people you support?
Did you ask about supports, Haley?
Yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. What has been helpful to you as facilitators?
So we have received a lot of support from our administration, from our board. Early on, I don't know, this has been several years ago, our executive director and our services director and myself went to New York City. YAI does training for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So we received this, the three of us attended the Elevatus training, which is a 3-day, pretty comprehensive approach to working with people with individual intellectual disabilities.
I think too, I think we kind of pile on, maybe the parents having a large role in providing some of the barriers that we experience, but two, on the flip side of that, when we do get buy-in from parents, we always see a boost in attendance to some of the education sessions we try to put on. So, support from families when it comes is really important to us too.
2 minutes left. Okay, I think we're done, Haley.
Well, thank you all so much for sharing all of your information and wisdom that you've learned from facilitating these. All right, so next we're going to speak with some folks with lived experience experts. I'll be joined by Jody Powers, Sarah Boyd, and Luna Eversong-Kloss. I invite you all to turn on your cameras again and unmute yourselves. Sarah, our first question is for you.
Okay.
We want to know, how can folks with disabilities be safe in a relationship, and who can they talk to about safe sex?
They to talk to their parents about it if they're comfortable talking to their parents, or they to talk to like a therapist or something, or somebody like that, somebody that they're close to. So
Somebody they're close to and is supportive.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And how can you stay safe in a relationship?
You can stay safe by talking to your partner about it, like devoted or slow or fast, or because it's not just one person, it's both people that do it, the relationship. So, and you can also talk to your family members or to your people that you're close to about it and take their advice.
I love that. So what I'm hearing from you is that open conversation and communication is really important.
Yeah. So yes. So.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, Sarah. That's really important stuff. All right, our next question is for Luna. What would you like to share about your experiences advocating for sexual health or wellness?
I haven't had a whole lot of experience advocating. It's just been kind of on my own time. But I guess in my adult life is really when I've gotten inspired, because as I get older, I notice a lot of disparities in general for the disabled community and society, but definitely in terms of sexual violence and domestic violence. I'm sorry, I have my toddler with me. And domestic violence. And I've really started advocating for domestic abuse victims and how they affect the disabled community, because in 2017, I became pregnant with my son, and I became pregnant through rape. I was trying to leave an abusive partner, and he got very upset, and he raped me as punishment. And in the course of that relationship, I was probably raped over 50 times, but it took me a while to realize that all of those encounters were assault, because I would often blame myself or blame my disability, or I have a condition that also affects me physically due to past trauma. But when I was trying to escape that situation, the obstacles that I faced weren't so much because of my abuser at that point. I couldn't get away from him because the resources weren't there. And I remember when I was pregnant, I was trying to avoid telling my abuser about the pregnancy, and I went and applied for the housing voucher program and other services I knew I needed to not be so reliant on my abuser, because I think a lot of people assume that disabled people have all of these family supports, and that's not always the case. My family, I also come from an abusive family, and they kind of acknowledge my disability when it's convenient, but they just kind of assume that I can handle myself. They've kind of waken up since I went through that experience, but it's still an obstacle with them. But I remember with the housing voucher program, it ended up, before they finally got to me, my son, Obsidian, this is important, please go watch your cartoons. I'm so sorry. Before they finally got to me, my son was almost a year old. And Obsidian, my son was almost a year old. And I remember having to beg for other services, and I remember getting in touch with this organization, but they primarily assisted elderly people. And the woman interviewing me, it was clear she did not want to help me because of my age and the fact that I had a kid. CPS had to step in and help me. A bunch of people had to step in and help me, but it took months and months to get people to understand that because of my situation, I couldn't just leave and then go seek help. I needed help before I could leave. And it was just trying to get people to understand that was the hardest part. And I ended up, during my pregnancy, had to get back with my abuser because it was taking too long to get those services. Those programs prioritize people based off of age, whether or not you have kids, and then disability. They don't take into account disabled people in emergency crisis situations that need help now. And we have organizations like Adult Protection Services, who actually a mental health facility tried to get me involved with, but they never followed up with me. And when I finally followed up with them, they told me they couldn't do anything because I was already doing what I needed to get out. And I said, well, I was told that you guys investigate abusive situations and then you help prosecute people that are committing these abuses. And they said, no, we don't do that. We just provide pamphlets and resources. And I said, how is that supposed to help people? So I ultimately had to fight tooth and nail to get myself out. And the resources that I did end up getting were scraping the bottom of the barrel. Obsidian, I need you to go play. I'm so sorry. I think you might be muted, but it was like scraping the bottom of the barrel. And a lot of the services I got, there was still a lot of ways where I wasn't getting the help that I needed, but it was the best that my community had to offer. Obsidian, you need to go play, or you go to your room. Go play. So sorry. But so that's like the most important thing to me, is trying to use my experience to get people to understand that domestic violence and assault, it's a problem for women, but it's an even bigger and more prolific problem for women with disabilities, because often the way that things are set up for us, we have to be reliant on someone. And oftentimes that someone is an abuser, and it can be our family members, it can be our partners, and almost every relationship I have been in has been abusive. And I'm married now, and for the most part, that relationship is good. But even sometimes in this relationship, he shows abusive tendencies. And it's scary now, because I don't know if you guys know what a disabled adult child is, but it means that I have never worked and I get all of my resources and income from the government. When you get married and you married an able-bodied person that's working, they take away every ounce of your resources, your financial support, your medical, everything. And your spouse becomes your legal guardian. I'm listed as both my husband's wife and daughter. And he's a good guy, but he's having some issues right now. And it's just, even though he doesn't put me through near what I've been through, it's triggering a lot of the times, because I know if I need to get out, I won't have anything to survive with. And it could take years, if I'm lucky, to get those resources back. So it's very easy as a disabled woman to be in a situation and not just feel trapped, but literally be trapped. And a lot of the time society doesn't understand that. And when you reach out, you get responses like, why don't you just leave? Why don't you just do that or this? And a lot of people just don't understand that it's not that simple. And I remember when I was going to court testifying against my abuser, the fact that my disability played a part in the severity of my abuse, that never even came up. It never came up. Like unless you've been through it, or you have a family member that's disabled or anything like that, people just don't consider how our disabilities can contribute to our experiences with abuse and domestic violence and caregiver violence. A lot of us go through it. We've been through it as children, we go through it as adults, and it's very, very, very hard to get help because people don't understand. So the biggest barrier is trying to get able-bodied people that don't have the limitations that we have to understand the kind of help we need, and that we can't wait for them to be ready to provide that help. There needs to be a system for us to get emergency immediate access to the resources we need to be able to survive. Because if I hadn't got out of that relationship, he was on the verge of killing me. He would choke me out and do things like that. And I think he would have killed me had I stayed, because he no longer saw me as a person, he saw me as property.
Wow, that is really powerful, Luna. Thank you so much for sharing your story and for highlighting the disparities that folks with disabilities experience.
Talk too long.
You didn't. That was really brave of you to share that. And thank you so much for being here and for sharing your home with us, your child. Appreciate your child letting you come and hang out with us today.
In the pandemic, whenever he sees people in any capacity, he's got to be the center of attention.
I am the same with you. I am the same with you.
I'll mute my mic.
Thank you so much, Luna. Hi. All right, our next question is for Jody Powers, my colleague on the Indiana Disability Justice Task Force. All right, Jody, what would you like to share about sexual well-being and sexual violence primary prevention?
Hi, everyone. First, I want to say, Luna, you are so awesome for me, for telling your story. It was powerful. Thank you. Hey.
Jody said, first she wants to say, Luna, thank you for sharing your story. That was so powerful.
If we want to prevent self-awareness of disabled people.
If we want to prevent sexual violence against disabled people,
We need to stop viewing us as regular human beings.
we need to stop viewing us as, I'm sorry, say that again.
We need to view us as human beings.
We need to group us as human beings.
Yeah.
View.
Yes.
Sorry.
And we didn't know that having a minimum and too much home.
If you didn't know this,
No, that having
you didn't notice.
having a minimum is having the money. Hey,
Haley is helping me communicate.
I have cerebral palsy.
I have cerebral palsy.
But when I was never seen as a sexual being when I was growing up.
I was never seen as a sexual being when I was growing up.
I was mainstream.
I was
in a public school.
I was in a public
school as SelfAdvocacy. Yes. And I was the only person with a disability.
And I was the only person with a disability.
Yes. I had all the same education as with able-bodied classmates.
I had the same education as my classmates.
However, I never saw when we talk about sex.
However, I was never taught about.
No. When we had sex education.
When we had sex education.
All the videos and videos were always up able-bodied people.
I'm sorry, one more time, Jody.
All the videos.
All the pics and videos were of able-bodied people.
Yeah. And I remember with parents talking about how my brothers would get married one day and have children.
I remember my parents would talk about my brothers would get married one day and have children.
But that was never a transportation for me.
But they would never
cut the word about me. Cut the word about me.
Talk that way about me.
Yeah. So I am a Christian.
I am a Christian.
And I value waiting until marriage.
And I was waiting until marriage.
I valued VALUED.
Vowed.
VALUED.
Valued.
Waiting until marriage. However, what's adult on my own.
Once I got on my own.
And I and I'm on beginning to date,
And I was beginning to date.
and then realized that I was and that I was to be a sexual being,
And I was able to be a sexual being.
and then no more that would be possible.
I didn't know that would be possible.
It would be hard to prepare for that.
So I wasn't prepared for that.
And that is meaning what I was threatened to anyone who gave me attention in that way.
I was attracted
Yeah,
to anyone who gave me attention that way.
yeah. I think that is an issue for a lot of people.
I think this is an issue for a lot of people.
They we are not able to be open.
We're not able to be open
with our sexuality.
With our sexuality.
We live our lives. We getting to everyone have then we will be able to know what we want and we let it stop and what we don't want.
We will be able to know what we want and what we don't want.
And we let it.
One more time, I'm sorry.
And we let it.
In a relationship.
I am lost for words.
I am lost for words.
Because and I'm not remembering all the sexual experiences I have had.
Because I'm now remembering all the sexual experiences I have had.
And with I knew that I deserved better.
And I wish I knew that I deserved better.
However, the one around me.
However, the one around me.
The world.
Women.
The world.
World, I'm sorry.
Around me. Always taught me that I was less than.
Always taught me I was less than.
They really as this time people with disabilities are left out so much.
Because people with disabilities are left out so much.
Yeah, we deal with a lot isolation.
Say one more time. We
deal with isolation.
We still
deal with
isolation. Gotcha.
Yes. And because all these partners.
And all the pressures.
Because of that.
Because of all of that.
We know
people don't value our rights.
People don't value our rights.
Yeah. So when people with disabilities get in relationships,
So when people with disabilities get in relationships,
that's what forever.
That's
when forever. It's when the time we are not used to with women.
I'm sorry. One more time.
Because we are not used to be hard with partners.
Because we are not viewed as.
We are not used. We are not
used to being heard.
Yeah, with passion.
And being respected.
That when we get in relationships.
So when we get in relationships.
Telling you doing it is often a problem.
Which is often a problem? Violence.
Yeah. If people with if people include us.
If people include us.
In part of society.
In every part of society.
Yes. Then we wouldn't be so vulnerable.
Then we wouldn't be so vulnerable.
And we will know our laws.
And we would know our laws.
Our laws.
Our work.
Yes. And we are involved in the community. Able to people will be able to see our laws.
And if we're involved in the community, able-bodied people would see our worth too.
So if we want to prevent violence, we must address accessibility issues.
So if we want to prevent violence, we must address accessibility
issues. And prejudice.
And prejudice.
Prejudice. Yes. In the midst of people with disabilities.
Against people with disabilities.
And the myth.
I'm sorry.
And the myth. M-O-T.
Myth. Gotcha.
Yeah. Exactly. J-A-C-K-I-E. The people are here away on the money.
Say that one more time. I'm sorry.
Jackie. Yeah. Sad. People with disabilities are not that people with without disabilities.
People with disabilities are
much different.
Are much different.
Are not much different.
Well, people without disabilities.
And people without disabilities.
I think she said that we're not much different than people without.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. We are technically we are technical beings.
We are sexual beings.
And we want to be many of us want to
what the ability that I have children.
And we want to be able to be in a relationship and have children.
Yeah, and we need to change the idea that we are so much different.
And people have the idea that we are so much different.
Yeah, but we're not.
But we're not.
We need more support.
One more time, I'm sorry.
We need more support.
We need more supports.
That is true.
That is true.
But that's okay. It's not as much as less than.
But that's okay. That doesn't mean we're less than.
Anyway, thank you very much. I was a little bit over the place.
It was not all over the place, Jody. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us.
Yes.
I had to help you communicate, but inside I was going, yes, Jody, I love this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. How we communicate.
You're welcome. All right, our last panelist for today is Nicole Cass-Colvin. Hi, Nicole. Nicole is a sexual assault advocate and prevention specialist at Safe Place in Southeastern Indiana. All right, Nicole, we want to talk a little bit about resources that are available. So what resources are available for rape victims with disabilities, in particular, those with intellectual or developmental disabilities?
Yeah, so I think this is a really great question, and I wish that I had a magic answer, but as the research kind of shows and as we've heard, there aren't necessarily a lot of supports or resources, but I am hearing everybody and Jody and Luna and Sarah talk about their experiences as well. I think honestly, the biggest resources that we have are people with disabilities themselves. That's, you know, what we as advocates and anybody really should be listening to our survivors with disabilities and listening to what they have to say, what their needs are, all of that. And I think in advocacy, we are used to not having resources, right? There just are never resources, and it's something that, you know, our work isn't always given the resources that we need or valued in the ways that it needs to be. So we are used to making do with what we have, and the importance is really the relationship with the person in front of us and what we can create from that. So really what that means for me is sitting with the individual in front of me, listening to their needs, asking, you know, what's accessible for you? Like, what are the best ways for you to communicate? Like, what's going on in your head and how can we, you know, work together on that? And so within that, we can really kind of figure out what feels best for that person and is directed by that person because they know themselves best, they know their experience best, and they know what they need. So again, that looks like figuring out what's easiest and most accessible, what ways of communication feel best. So maybe that's creating together some visual resources. So instead of like a self-care plan or a safety plan that's all written out, maybe it has some images along with it. Maybe if that person communicates through PECs or something, maybe we work with that and try and figure out the best way to communicate so that I can hear and we can talk together. Maybe that's making sure if that person needs a communication device that I'm honoring that and making sure that I am working with that person to best communicate. So it could also mean, and what I've been hearing a lot too, and have certainly seen, is that if somebody has a guardian, a caregiver, or a family member, or all of the above who is maybe abusive or maybe doesn't even understand what's that person views as best. And again, that person is the expert of their own life and their own experience. We want to make sure that we are taking that into account, because that's not okay, right? So what that means often is making sure to separate those two folks, like the survivor, from that person who may not be safe or may not be healthy. So that can mean just getting another advocate involved so that we can meet separately for a little bit and just have some one-on-one conversation. That could be exploring legal issues and things like that. But I just really want to highlight that survivor is the most important resource that we could have. That being said, there are also other resources that I lean on heavily. So, I know Sierra had mentioned Skylar from MESA and the Disability Justice Task Force. They are an amazing resource, and I love talking to them. Haley, of course, and ICASA HT are great resources. The Disability Justice Task Force, ICADV, and Sierra. Indiana Disability Rights, I've talked to them. Accessibility is another amazing resource. A national resource is Speaking for Ourselves, and that's a self-advocacy group, as well as self-advocates becoming empowered. So I just like to reach out to a lot of different resources like those as well. But I think another great resource is teamwork. So as an advocate, I do focus on that survivorship and that preventing sexual violence and responding to sexual violence. But there are also disability serving agencies that could make a great team with us. So communicating often and effectively with those agencies can be a really great way to serve folks holistically and make sure that we are being accessible and advocating in the best ways that we can.
Wonderful, thank you. How about resources for prevention of sexual violence against folks with disabilities?
Yeah, so really my answer to this one is pretty much the same, that, we do really lack this. And this is something that I've realized, I'm at fault for too, and can do better at. And I think that we as a movement need to do a better job of being inclusive and being intersectional. And so like when I look at our curriculum, there are adaptations to make it virtual. There's adaptations for different age groups and things like that, but there's not an adaptation specific to people with disabilities. And I think that that's a problem. So, and a lot of the classrooms that I believe all of the classrooms that we're in right now are integrated. So we need that kind of adaptation within all of our sessions. So, I mean, I am really excited and jotted down a lot of notes about the Elevate Us, and then the what Melissa had spoken about too in the program that they had created. So I'll definitely be looking at that as well. But I think we definitely do need those options, and we do need to be more cognizant of that. I think the other thing that really struck me in the research is that there aren't even any books to like refer people to, and that's really just a challenge. So I think that it's important to try and find those resources, and I know that's something that I will certainly be doing now. But I also know that there are a lot of good like Facebook groups, YouTube channels, etc. For and by people with disabilities. But I want to make sure that people always check with, the Disability Justice Task Force and other folks to make sure that those are safe and healthy resources, especially the ones that are specific to people with disabilities, because you may not be able to have access to those. So we want to make sure those are good resources if it's something that you can't vet out yourself. So I also just want to say that it's really important, if you are an agency that works with people with disabilities, to partner with your local rape crisis centers, because we are a great resource for you as far as prevention and education. So we can train staff, we can be asked to provide education to those that you serve or incorporate bodily autonomy, consent, boundaries, decision-making, all of that into everything that we do, and helping you kind of understand how you can do that as well. Also know that you can call us at Rape Crisis Centers anytime. You can ask questions of us. You can ask for recommendations. You can bounce ideas off of us, have us at staff meetings, talk through red flags, anything. So, you know, it's important to learn these things because you could really impact someone's life. So we're here for you in that respect, and we have your backs.
Thank you so much, Nicole. So our last question for you. What are your thoughts about the importance of education, one, for healthy relationships and self-advocacy for women with developmental disabilities, and two, for preventing sexual abuse?
Yeah, so I honestly think education is so vitally important because in, you know, helping with healthy relationships and sexual self-advocacy with folks with IDD, you know, it's monumentally important because there, as we have seen, is not a lot of education on it. And we know that these folks are being victimized at a much, much higher rate than folks without disabilities. And there just aren't the same kinds of support. So we want to make sure that this is being offered. We want to acknowledge that people with disabilities are sexual creatures as much as everyone else is, you know, and sexual beings. So we also know that folks with disabilities might be particularly vulnerable because of, you know, the different ways that the system doesn't support people with disabilities. So we want to be able to provide that education and things like that, so people know that things that are happening may not be okay and how they can get help. And something that I do want to name with this as well is that I have in the past worked with folks with disabilities in modalities that may have not been the best, like that are often abusive to folks with people with disabilities. And I'm not proud of that. And I left that field because it didn't feel great. But we often within those fields teach people with disabilities that, hey, you can't say no to authorities. You have to obey others. Your bodily autonomy and your boundaries don't matter. And that what makes others comfortable is more important than your needs. So we want to just make sure that we are counteracting that through education and letting people know, hey, you have the right to say no. Your bodily autonomy is important, and your needs are important. So I just want to name that and want to counteract that in whatever ways we can. We also know that education is so important overall because it helps us create norms in our society that say, hey, this is okay and this isn't okay. So that's really helpful in eradicating violence in general because we can say, hey, these healthy things are the norm and these unhealthy things are not the norm. So we can kind of help shape that larger cultural and societal level in that way too.
Well, Nicole, thank you so much for your expertise and for sharing what you've learned through the years. I especially appreciate you mentioning and naming that concept of learned compliance. That is really, really huge. And we heard it from some of our folks in other questions today too. So I believe we are at time. I do want to go ahead and highlight here, Sierra has shared our Disability Justice and Violence Prevention Resource Hub. Please check it out. If you go to indisabilityjustice.org, hit subscribe, help us meet our grant objectives so that we can continue to get funding to do this really crucial and important work. We don't send a ton of emails or anything out like that, occasional newsletters, and you will get updates about our future presentations. We do plan to do a follow-up session to this conversation in the fall, and we'll be asking our panelists to return so we can really get more in depth about sexual violence, primary prevention, and education. I want to thank everyone so much for taking the time to be here in community with us today. Please reach out to us at Indiana Disability Justice if you have any questions, if you'd like to learn more. Thank you to the folks at Village of Marici, the folks at the Center for Health Equity, to our lived experience experts, Jody, Sarah, and Luna. What you shared today was so powerful and so important. Thank you for your courage. And lastly, thank you, Nicole, for sharing about the Rape Crisis Centers. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to stop recording.